At AARP Missouri, we want to support you as you age. But first, you should learn a little more about us. AARP is a nonprofit organization working to help adults 50 plus in Missouri live their lives to the fullest. We advocate for over 700,000 members on important issues such as strengthening Social Security, protecting access to health care, and ensuring everyone has independence and choice as they age. AARP Missouri also offers online tools, resources, and programs you can access right from the comfort of your home. Learn how to protect yourself from fraud and scams with the AARP Fraud Watch Network. Become an active part of AARP Missouri as a virtual volunteer. Find support while caring for a loved one through our caregiving resources. And enjoy a variety of fun virtual events that improve your health and wellness, like our exercise series, Moving It. At AARP Missouri, there's an entire community waiting for you. Learn more about us at aarp.org/mo.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining AARP Missouri for our virtual tour of the American Jazz Museum. I'm Bettina Robson, and I am an AARP volunteer. I am delighted to be able to share this live presentation with you today. In our presentation, we're going to take a virtual tour of the American Jazz Museum, then have a Q&A session with museum staff. We're also going to feature some live jazz from the Mutual Musicians Foundation. AARP Missouri is pleased to bring you this live virtual event. And here at AARP Missouri, we celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion every day of the year. And as part of AARP's mission, we work to enhance the lives of all people 50 plus and their families. We have resources and information online at aarp.org/Missouri and information about AARP activities and events at aarp.org near you. You can also learn about volunteering with AARP at aarp.org/volunteer. And for your convenience, we're going to be putting these links that we just talked about in the chat. So AARP Missouri's efforts to help people live their best lives include so many different things. Virtual options like this one for caregivers who may face challenges with in-person events, or resources for protecting yourself against fraud through online information. Or you could attend local shred events. And we work to establish a more livable communities with our livable community teams. These efforts go beyond housing and transportation to include social participation that virtual events like this one offer. And as I mentioned, at AARP Missouri, we celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion every day of the year. In August, in addition to celebrating Charlie Parker's birthday on August the 29th, we highlight the International Day for People of African Descent. This is observed on August the 31st, every year, of course. And the United Nations created this holiday to celebrate the diverse heritage and contributions of people of African descent. African American contributions to jazz have long been recognized and celebrated in all parts of the world. Today, we're going to focus on Charlie Parker. We're going to be celebrating his art and talent, especially here in the Kansas City area. And we'll have the third of 4 virtual tours at the American Jazz Museum. Each one is focused on a different jazz master. Charlie Bird Parker was definitely a jazz master whose influence goes well beyond Kansas City. And before we get started, let me remind you to use the Q&A function in this webinar to ask your questions. As the tour goes along, we're going to pose your questions to our staff, and we want to know exactly what it is you want to know. So make sure you stick around also to the end, because we're going to be sharing information about discounts that the American Jazz Museum offers. And now I am thrilled to introduce James McGee. He is the American Jazz Musician Senior Manager of Visitor and Virtual Experience. So welcome, James. Great to always see you again, and tell us what's going on. How you doing today?
As Bettina mentioned, this is our third one. We're just really ecstatic about having you guys back again this month. As she mentioned, our spotlight for this tour is none other than Kansas City's own Charlie Parker. And we are really excited about it because we also have our annual In the Yard concert going on today at the American Jazz Museum to celebrate Charlie Parker's birthday, which is actually on August 29th. He was born August 29th, 1920, in Kansas City, Kansas, and moved to Kansas City, Missouri when he was about 2 or 3 years old, and pretty much grew up over here and learned and built his chops here in Kansas City to take around the world. So this is a great time for you all to be on this tour and to experience the American Jazz Museum. Just a little overview, as Bettina mentioned, I am the Senior Manager of Visitor and Virtual Experience here. And it's my role at the Jazz Museum to make sure that our attendees, whether it be in person or whether it be online virtually like you all are today, but everybody has a great experience and learns about not just the American Jazz Museum as an organization and institution, but about the music of jazz, America's truly original musical art form. It has a very complex, rich, and deep heritage. And it's really just the combination of the African rhythms matched with European instruments and instrumentation and vocals from spiritual parts that the slaves and the African Americans that were brought here during the transatlantic slave brought some of those customs and culture with them. And it's just the coolest blend of what America is. We are a fairly new country, so we're always creating something new. And jazz was one of those first things that really just kind of stuck and resonated around the world. Our jazz musicians here in Kansas City, if they have their horn, their saxophone, their trumpet, their drums, they can pretty much go anywhere in the world and find somebody that will appreciate what they do. So we're happy to have you here. A brief history on the American Jazz Museum. It was founded on September 5th, 1997. So for those who do good math, that's 25 years coming up here in September. So we'll be celebrating our 25th year anniversary beginning September with an opening to our 25th anniversary exhibit, which will be featured in our Changing Gallery here at the American Jazz Museum. And I believe we have one more tour scheduled for this series of tours. And I think that our exhibit will be up in time to give the next group an actual walkthrough of our 25th anniversary exhibit. It's called the 25th Anniversary Sound and Story. So you all have that to look forward to as well. If you ever make it to Kansas City, make sure you visit us here in the historic 18th and Vine District, which you'll get a little look at later on in the tour. But I'm going to go ahead and turn things over at this time to our resident historian, Mr. Eric Stafford. And he's going to actually give you the tour of the Jazz Museum. I'll be right there with him on the wings because we'll be able to answer some questions throughout the tour. We're not going to do too many of them because we want to make sure we keep the time concise, but there will be some opportunities to ask some questions about particular things. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end right before the musicians perform at the legendary Mutual Musicians Foundation. If you all haven't been on this tour yet, that is like the cherry on the icing for you all. So I hope you all enjoy. Thank you for being here with us at the American Jazz Museum. And I hope you get something from the tour.
Sounds great, James. I know we're already on this end. Just a quick reminder to all of our guests today, the chat is open and available for you to let us know where you're from and post your comments. And don't forget to use the Q&A if you have any questions. Take it away.
Okay. People refer to Kansas City as a cow town, and that's exactly what we are. It's a cow town. 80% of our economy came from the packing houses that were found in the West Bottoms. So in the packing houses, you have the grain and feed factories and the railroads work here, and it attracted immigrants to the area. One immigrant in particular had came here from St. Joseph, Missouri. He grew up right next door to where the notorious bank robber Jesse James was killed, and he was a gambler. His name was Jim Pendergast. Jim Pendergast happened to get lucky. He placed a bet on the horse that was a long shot to win, and the horse ended up winning. The name of the horse was the Climax, and he opened up a saloon in honor of the horse that won so much money for him, since it was a long shot. So he, being a gambler, he invited people to his tavern. When they got off work, they can come into his establishment and gamble. He was a man of the people, so he kept cash, and he kept cash reserves on hand. So whenever they got paid, they would cash their checks there, and they would stay there and gamble. And so he was elected alderman of the first ward, and he ruled in the first ward for over 18 years. And he was very philanthropic. So whenever people were hungry, he fed them. Whenever they were cold, he made sure that they had coal in their homes. He threw dinners, and he was elected alderman. He ruling for 18 years. And then when he grew old, his younger brother, Tom, took over. And they were notorious for holding illegal elections where they would hire people to vote over and over again. So they would hire poor people to vote 4 or 5 times on election day. This political machine was known as the Pendergast political machine, and it was responsible for the political career of Harry Truman and also for the rise of jazz here in Kansas City, because during Prohibition, it was not enforced here at the local level. However, it was enforced here at the federal level. So people say that jazz was born in New Orleans, but it grew up here in Kansas City because the musicians, they practiced 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The taverns never shut down. So here's an example of all the different clubs that were available for these musicians to hone their craft. Mary Lou Williams, she talks about them being like 50 clubs just on 12th Street alone. And 12th Street is where the original jazz district started. Many people have heard of the ragtime composition, 12th Street Rag, which celebrated 12th Street, which was created during the Pendergast political machine as the red light district. So that's where people first heard Count Basie, was right there on 12th Street. So as they say, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, jazz was born in New Orleans, but it grew up here in Kansas City, and 12th Street was wide open. This sign right here, the pink door, is reminiscent of, it was actually a sign that was there on 12th Street during the 1970s. So right here, we're gonna start with we're gentlemen here in Kansas City, so we're gonna start with the ladies. We're gonna start right here with Ella Fitzgerald. She's known as, many people call her the first lady of jazz. Here she is. She was actually honored by Pablo Picasso. Here is a rendition of his portrait of Ella Fitzgerald. This is actually a gown that she wore, and she was managed by Norman Gantz. He took over her career, and he showcased her here with the likes of Lester Young, Roy Eldridge, Oscar Peterson. Lester Young, he got his start here in Kansas City performing with Benny Moulton. And then when Benny Moulton died, Lester Young, he joined Count Basie's band. But it was Lester Young who actually gave Billie Holiday her nickname, Lady Day. And she nicknamed him Prez. And Harry Belafonte credits him with even inventing the word cool. But here he performed with Ella Fitzgerald. You have Roy Eldridge, who's an outstanding trumpet player. And Ella Fitzgerald, she experienced racism while she was flying to Hawaii first class. And they made her and her whole team, Norman Gantz included, they had to get up and move from the first class to the second class because they did not believe that she was able or capable of even buying a plane ticket in first class. So she ended up suing and actually won. So Ella Fitzgerald, she started off at the Apollo Theater in New York City. And she was actually supposed to be on stage as a dancer, but she got on stage and she got stage frightened and she started singing, and she actually won that night. But she started her career with Chick Webb, who was a drummer, okay, and a band leader. And she performed Tisket a Tasket. Also, here she is with Dizzy Gillespie. She performed with everybody from Charlie Parker to Dizzy Gillespie, to Count Basie. All those people had the pleasure of performing with Ella Fitzgerald. She was a scatter. So she was known as, so she was one of the pioneers of scatting, okay, where people actually use their voice as an instrument. And here she is with Louis Armstrong, who was also a scatter as well. So Louis Armstrong, as you know, was one of the first people to popularize jazz and put jazz on the map. He was very much mainstream, but he was a vocalist and a trumpeter. And he got his start with the King Oliver Band in New Orleans. Here we are. So we're going to go ahead and move to over here to Louis Armstrong. And Louis Armstrong, like I said, was very instrumental in the rise of jazz. And he started playing, he received a cornet. He was what they call a deviant youth. And growing up in the streets of New Orleans and Storyville, New Orleans, he actually ended up going to the Colored Youth Wave Center, not center. It was a residential facility or a boys' home. Okay, and that's where he received his cornet, and he started playing the cornet. This was around 1913, but he was accused of firing a gun or a pistol out in the streets, and he ended up having to go to the boys' home. But it was there that he grew up and he became a man, and he was first introduced to the cornet. But he started playing with King Oliver right there, right in the early 1920s, and he went to Chicago. And Chicago is also known as a mecca for jazz. He also played with the Fletcher Henderson Band, and the Fletcher Henderson was a pioneer in jazz music. He was a big band leader. And Louis Armstrong, he ended up getting he never really played with a huge band, but he played with a group of all-stars that he basically was the prime time or the highlight, the showcase at all times. But he's known for popularizing jazz, putting it on the mainstream, and he appeared on Time Magazine here in 1949 during the height of, when we were at the height of Jim Crow segregation. But people view Louis Armstrong as somewhat of a controversial figure because of some of the songs that he performed. They celebrated life in the South when it was very hard for Blacks. So he was criticized by his peers for some of the music that he performed, where he glorified plantation life. But he was real popular in Harlem. He performed at Connie's, which was actually partly owned by Dutch Schultz. And he had violated his contract with Dutch Schultz at the club called Connie's in Harlem, New York. And he had to go on a run. And he reached out to Joe Glasser out of Chicago, who was also involved in the mafia as well. And Joe Glasser provided protection for Louis Armstrong throughout his career. And he ended up managing his career. And Joe Glasser managed a number of other jazz musicians as well, like Billie Holiday and Orrin Hot Lips Page. But he is mostly known for managing the career of Louis Armstrong and rescuing it. So Joe Glasser did end up getting himself in a little trouble. He got caught up with a 14-year-old and had to marry her to avoid going to jail. So he was kind of like the R. Kelly of his day back in Chicago, back in the day, before people knew. So so Louis Armstrong, as I said, very controversial, but he is mostly known for putting jazz on the map, along with our next jazz giant that we will be featuring, and that is Mr. Duke Ellington. So Duke Ellington actually started off wanting to play baseball. he grew up in Washington, D.C., and he was featured a lot of all-stars in his band. One of them being Mary Lou Williams, who is known as the First Lady of Jazz. And she was a composer and arranger for Duke Ellington. But she got her start here in Kansas City playing with the Andy Kirk's band. But she's known as the First Lady of Jazz. He also had Harold Ashby in his band as well. And Harold Ashby actually is still living, but he was born in 1925. And then you also have Ben Webster, who's also known as the other great saxophone player here that hailed from Kansas City. So you had quite a few, Ben Webster being one. You had Lester Young, as I had mentioned before, and Harold Ashby. And of course, I featured later on Charlie Parker. But Duke Ellington, he performed here in Kansas City. He was a regular performer here in Kansas City. And for the first time at the Paseo Hall, right before Count Basie went on to New York, he and Count Basie performed at the Paseo Hall before Count Basie went on to invade New York and take over Harlem. But he and Duke Ellington appeared on the stage, same stage here in Kansas City. But Duke Ellington, along with Louis Armstrong, were the two most prominent people in jazz as far as making it mainstream. Duke Ellington, he performed all genres of jazz, from swing to bebop to spiritual music as well. And he was once arrested here in Kansas City he was riding around in a taxi cab with two fair-skinned women that appeared to be white. And so during this time, it was against the law for blacks and whites to mix with one another or to date one another. So Duke Ellington got pulled over. And so they found out that these were actually fair-skinned blacks, so they had to let him go. But he was quite a ladies' man. And a lot of his music was composed, and also along with Mary Lou Williams, was also Billy Strahan, was also a huge contributor to Duke Ellington. So he featured a number of giants, and his band was pretty much the most prominent band in jazz music. His big band was, because it lasted for so many decades. Okay, but our main person, our feature, our birthday feature, got his start here in Kansas City, and he grew up wanting to be a musician. So, as I said, ragtime has his roots here. Also, rock and roll does too. And the original jazz district started actually on 12th Street. And 12th Street, in 1914, they built a bridge that connected the Kansas City's industrial area to its commercial area, and that was the 12th Street Bridge. And from there is where the original jazz district started, and that's where Count Basie first broadcasted live from in the late 1920s. Okay, so at this time, when Count Basie had first came to Kansas City, Charlie Parker was 8 years old. And so Count Basie, his band, was traveling through Kansas City, and they got stuck. So he ended up staying because there was work here, because the city never shut down. So the taverns needed musicians, and the theaters also needed musicians as well. And so Count Basie, right here in this neighborhood on 18th and Vine, he played the score at the Eblon Theater, which is owned by Homer Jap Eblon. So the 18th and Vine district was much like a Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and is from the 18th and Vine and 12th Street districts areas. 18th and Vine and 12th Street were the focal points of Black life during the time of segregation here in Kansas City, and they were thriving up into the middle 1950s, early 1960s. But it was 12th Street on 12th in Cherry, where the police station is now, where the Reno Club was, and that's where Count Basie first broadcasted live from, and it went nationwide. And in his band, you had I had mentioned Lester Young, but you also had Buster Smith, and Buster Smith was a mentor to Charlie Parker. So you also have Walter Page, and you also have Joe Jones. And when Joe Jones first heard Charlie Parker on stage, you know how they had the gong show and they will gong you when they don't like you. So that's what they did to Charlie Parker when he appeared on stage. They gonged him, and he left the stage, and so he went to the Ozarks and took up the practice of what they call woodshedding. Then he came back to Kansas City and as a new man. You also have, I mentioned Mary Lou Williams. She's known as the first lady of jazz. She got her start here in Kansas City. She actually started playing at the age of 3 years old. She's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And her husband, John Williams, he played in Andy Kirk's band. And they came here from Oklahoma to Kansas City. And then Andy Kirk, he went on to New York, and he went on to New York, and so did Mary Lou Williams. And Mary Lou Williams was a mentor to young musicians during the beginning stages of the bebop era. So people like Charles Mingus, Max Roach, Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, they would go to her house, Mary Lou Williams, to her apartment in Harlem after their shows, after their gigs, and talk shop. So here on this wall are the people that are largely responsible for Kansas City's jazz scene, and there's far too many people for us to really point out everybody on here. But I do want to point out some people, and if we can get the camera over here, I want to point at Big Joe Turner right here. Big Joe Turner, you ought to have heard of Shake, Rattle, and Roll. But Big Joe Turner, he was the first person to sing Shake, Rattle, and Roll. He sang it before Bill Haley and the Comets and before Elvis Presley. Here you have Lester Young, who gave Billie Holiday her nickname Lady Day, and she nicknamed him Prez. And Harry Belafonte says that it's Lester Young that even invented the word cool. Like, this is cool, that's cool. Here's Mr. Jimmy Rushing. He's also known as Mr. Five by Five because he was 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide. And then here's another picture of, so as we move, here's Julia Lee right here, who was invited as a guest of Harry S. Truman to perform at the White House. And a lot of people have came and they were gone too soon, and they didn't get a chance to, and we didn't get a chance to experience their greatness. People like Countess Johnson, who often filled in for Mary Lou Williams. She passed away. And then there was another guy by the name of Clifford Brown. We're going to be talking about Charlie Parker, but Clifford Brown, he died at the age of 25 years old. He was a trumpeter, much like in the tradition of Miles Davis. Here you have Count Basie right here. So on this wall right here, like I said, are the people that laid the foundation for Kansas City's jazz scene. And along this timeline here, you can find this right here down on 18th and Vine in the middle of the Jazz District. This is a timeline of jazz. It goes all the way from the 1920s all the way to modern era. But Kansas City has continued and will always be on the jazz scene and paramount on the jazz scene. But you can track American history through the study of jazz. So we're going to go ahead and come back in and talk about the birthday boy. So had it not been for COVID, in 2020, people from all over the world would have came here to celebrate the 100th birthday of Charlie Parker. So Charlie Parker was born over in Kansas City, Kansas. His father was a performer, okay? And Charlie Parker was of the lineage of the Choctaw Indian, okay? And his father was a performer. They settled here in this area over on the Kansas City, Kansas side. And they came here during that Black exodus out of the South, okay? And Charlie Parker ended up moving across the river to Kansas City, Missouri at the early age of like 10 years old when his father abandoned the family. And he lived on the west side of the city and attended a school called Penn School, which at the time, Penn School was established in 1868, right at the end of the Civil War. And at the time it was established, it was the first school, one of the first schools west of the Mississippi River, established for the express purpose of teaching free men, because it was established in 1868, right during that period of Reconstruction. But it was a 2-room schoolhouse, and that's where Charlie Parker got his first saxophone. And the schoolhouse was so small that he had to go outside to practice. So during this time, Charlie Parker was born in 1920. And so Kansas City's jazz age was swinging at the time he was born. It was just beginning to swing really, really hard. So I had mentioned the Paseo Hall, and the Paseo Hall is where they would hold band battles up into the wee hours of the morning. People like George Lee, Benny Moten, Jesse Stone, all these people participated in these band battles. And so you have Walter Page here, and Walter Page's band were the Blue Devils, which was rated by Benny Moten. And then when Benny Moten died in 1934, Count Basie inherited his band. And it was what the band started as Walter Page's Blue Devils. And it was a territorial band. So that's what Charlie Parker grew up listening to. So he attended Penn School, then he went to Addix Elementary School, and then he also went to, he attended Lincoln High School. And his teacher, Leo Davis, recognized his genius there at Lincoln High School. And Charlie Parker, he dropped out at the age of 15 years old to become a musician. He and his girlfriend at the time, Rebecca, she had lived at Charlie Parker's home as a boarder, but that was his girlfriend, and he actually asked her to marry him at the age of 15 years old. And they would walk home from school, and he would see the people, the musicians in the halls and in the taverns, all dressed up, playing music, sounding good, looking good. And that's what he aspired to be. And so at the age of 15 years old, he dropped out of school, and he joined different bands, several different bands. He performed up and down 18th Street, 12th Street. And 12th Street was, as I said before, it was the red light district. And it was easy to find whatever you needed on 12th Street. Anything good could be found on 12th Street, and definitely anything bad could be found on 12th Street. And as I said, 12th Street and 18th Street were the focal points of Black life, but that's how Charlie Parker honed his skills. That's how he earned his stripes, going in and out of the taverns on 12th Street until he became the person that he was, the genius that he was, until he became known as the Bird. But during that time, musicians, when they would travel, and they did a lot of traveling back then, they could not just stay wherever there was a hotel or wherever there was any type of facility to house anybody because of segregation. And so a lot of times they traveled and were at night when they should have been sleeping, or they may have pulled off on the side of the road or whatever. But one time he was driving to a gig out of town, and he had because of the musicians back then lacked sleep, had a car wreck, and one of his bandmates died, and Charlie Parker was experiencing a great deal of pain, so he ended up using morphine to deal with the pain that he experienced from the car wreck, and that's how he got hooked on drugs. But it was through a car wreck, and but drugs were readily available on 12th Street, and they were actually quarantined on 12th Street and kept a protected environment on 12th Street, and that was by design. But here you have this is an example of musicians and they're traveling, and this is them going overseas to France, and Blacks were treated a lot better in Paris, France than they were here in their own country that they fought and died for. So here you have Sidney Bechet, who's a clarinet player, Max Roach, Miles Davis. Max Roach was a drummer. Kenny Dorham, he played the trumpet. Hot Lips Page was from Kansas City. He was in Count Basie's band. He was much like Louis Armstrong, and he's actually signed by Joe Glasser, the same person that signed Louis Armstrong, Orrin Hot Lips Page. But Orrin Hot Lips Page was pretty much in the tradition of Louis Armstrong. He was a singer and a trumpeter as well. But here are some of the pioneers of bebop. And bebop is the music that Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, Adam Clayton Powell were listening to while they were planning boycotts and protests. Count Basie, the type of music that they played was the type of music that you could dance to. The type of music that Charlie Parker played, Bud Powell, Miles Davis, you had to listen to it. But that's the music that ushered in the civil rights music. That's the music that changed the norm, that challenged the way traditional jazz was presented. And so because of that, Charlie Parker is the fourth person inducted into the Music Hall of Fame. And his legacy still lives here today, here in Kansas City. Brian Parker, he lives over in Kansas City, Kansas, and he's a writer himself. This saxophone right here, I want to showcase this. This saxophone was a plastic saxophone that Charlie Parker played in Toronto. If you ever get the opportunity to check out Massey Hall, you can put it up on YouTube. Any of Charlie Parker's music, you can put it up on YouTube. You have also, one of my favorites is Coco and Parker's Mood. So we, as we celebrate August 29th, 1920, Charlie Parker was born, and Monday we will be celebrating his birthday. That's his official birthday, but he is recognized as the pioneering, premier, world famous saxophone player. And when people think of Kansas City, they think of Charlie Parker. And he has a large part to do with Kansas City's cultural identity and the reason Kansas City is known for jazz itself, and how jazz made it into the mainstream, and not just mainstream America, but all over the world. So we're going to go ahead and head to the Mutual Musicians Foundation, where Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie met for the first time and performed for each other. And so we're going to that very spot, to that world famous spot that's still performing today as a living museum right here in the heart of America.
Thank you, Eric, for that that information. I hope you all were able to enjoy the information that he provided. Like Eric said, we're going to head over to the Mutual Musicians Foundation, but we do have a walking tour of the 18th and Vine Historic District before we get there. But Eric, I know there was a question that someone in the audience had.
Yeah, the question that we have is, and it's kind of a big question. In general, did the mafia organized crime control the economics of jazz from the beginnings?
Did the mafia and organized crime control the industry of jazz from the beginning?
Great question. When you say that, I wouldn't say necessarily the beginning, and I would say yes and no. I would say jazz has always been associated with the criminal element, with the mafia. It was established in the Roaring '20s during Prohibition. And so the mafia definitely had a large part in the environment, because liquor rolled all through the taverns. And so you have liquor, and it was distributed and controlled by the mafia. Okay. And they controlled a lot of the jazz clubs, like the Cotton Club was controlled by Oni Madden. You have the Grand Terrace Ballroom, was partly owned by Al Capone. So jazz and the mafia has always been connected. And because jazz took off during the Roaring '20s, during Prohibition, and it was the mafia that controlled the distribution, the manufacturing and the distribution of liquor. So it has always been connected, and that's how it's connected to a criminal element. And a lot of the so the Birdland, for instance, was partly owned by Morris Levy, and he used the Birdland, they said, to wash money for the Genovese crime family So it's always been connected in some source. And a lot of them manage the careers of a lot of the jazz musicians as well. But initially, from the very, very beginning, I don't know, but I think, they started off as the talent or whatever, but then that talent in itself just was kind of corralled and managed by a criminal element associated with the mafia. If that makes any sense, but I think naturally and at the very beginning, the very start or the root of it, it comes from African-American culture.
And Eric, thank you so much. That tour was amazing. And we've got a lot of great comments about how all the information is inspiring and interesting. So I can tell that all of our guests today really appreciated that. But we do have time for just a couple more questions. And I wanted to, I'm hearing something in the background. I wanted to ask you, why was it that Charlie Parker left Kansas City and went to New York?
That's interesting, and you can all hear me. That's an interesting question that you asked, because the narrative is that Charlie Parker, and Eric's in here with me right now. The question is why Charlie Parker left Kansas City and went to New York. And a part of that narrative is that Charlie Parker couldn't experience what he wanted to and develop as an artist here. A lot of things that the artists now experience that are in Kansas City. And I know there's a popular myth that he's not even actually buried in Kansas City.
Yeah, but he is buried in Kansas
Yeah.
City. And it was just a bigger market. I mean, it was simply a bigger market because it was just one. Kansas City was a launching ground, and he wanted to go to Chicago too, but he really wanted to go to New York because it was a bigger market. New York is the Big Apple, and so Kansas City, though, was a training ground for everyone. And one reason he wanted to go to New York is because Count Basie went to New York, and Count Basie did well in New York. Count Basie had went to New York before them, and New York, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And so Charlie Parker, he actually hoboed to New York, and he went through Chicago, and then he ended up in New York, and then he had to come back to Kansas City when his father died. And then he ended up going back out to New York with the Jamie Shand Band, and made a name for himself, and then went on to California, to Paris, France, and everything else. But it's just a bigger market, and it always has been. But Kansas City was a training ground, and it was a difference. By the time that the musicians from Kansas City arrived in New York, because they weren't arriving on planes, they were traveling. So they looked real raggedy by the time they got to New York. And so
Absolutely.
they looked like country bumpkins or hits from the sticks. And so people laughed at them, like, what do these guys got on? Because their suits were wrinkled and they might have been a little busty or whatever. And so when they got on stage, all that went away. And then they took them shopping afterwards. And then they, cleaned them up a little bit and everything. And then they were ready, got on prime time. But they were at first, it was initial, like, what were these? They would call them hits from the sticks, but they were welcome. And Count Basie was actually from he was from New Jersey. He was from Red Bank, New Jersey. So he knew his way around anyway. And so he was kind of like the ambassador. He was from Kansas. He
Absolutely.
had been in Kansas City. He was from New York, and he had lived there a little bit as well, so he knew the ropes.
And we have a little time right before when we end our walking tour for a few more questions before the band starts, so we can get to some more of those questions I see coming up here. And if you all don't mind, we'd like to go ahead and take you through a little walking tour of the 18th and Vine District. Are we there now? Can we get to that?
Yeah, no, I am ready. And people were talking about music. We're going to have some live music. We
And
want to know
also-
what's going on out there.
Yeah, so we're in the historic 18th and Vine District. This is just southeast of downtown Kansas City. Can you hear me okay, Bettina?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay. So, and this is our iconic 18th and Vine neon sign that sits right on the northwest corner of 18th and Paseo. We're right now on 18th Street. And as Eric mentioned, 18th Street is just south of 12th Street, which is where the original red light entertainment and jazz district would have been So 12th Street would be known as more like the lower ends of downtown for the Black community, and 18th Street was like the upper crust part of downtown. So where you would dress to the nines, women would wear their hats and dresses, men with their suits and shoes. And this is where you came to see and be seen. Just to the left of us is the Soiree Oyster and Steakhouse. That was the original location of the Streets Hotel. And that's where the original Blue Room was located. You also see to the left where this door is the Jazz District Apartments. Used to be Jones Pool Hall. On the second floor, there was a pool hall where Black musicians, entertainers, and politicians would meet, shoot a game of pool, and just fellowship. And downstairs was the barber shop. It's currently the temporary home for the Call newspaper, which is the first African-American newspaper established west of the Mississippi in 1919. Just you see some of the vendors there on the left. During First Fridays, we have a festival in the community where vendors, food trucks, and entertainment is provided to the community free of charge. And people can shop with local makers and vendors. They can eat local food and just enjoy the 18th and Vine experience in a very lively manner. And of course, this is the famous intersection of 18th and Vine, which is not mentioned in the Going to Kansas City song. They say 12th Street and Vine, but in the song prior to that, Piney Brown Blues, which was recorded by Joe Turner and Pete Johnson, they have the same cadence, melody, and rhythm of Going to Kansas City with similar lyrics, but it mentions 18th and Vine. This is the historic Lincoln Building. This is where a lot of the Black entrepreneurs and business owners had their offices. So you had attorneys, doctors, photographers, and different people in business industries in that building. And this corner shows the current Blue Room, which Eric gave you a tour of earlier in the virtual stream here. We have live jazz there on Mondays, Fridays, and Thursdays. Monday is our open jam session. Fridays are regular Blue Room nights, and Saturdays are regular Blue Room nights. We have the Indigo Hour on Friday at 5 p.m., and that's free of charge. And we'll just move ahead a little bit for time's sake. Here we have the historic Gym Theater.
Yeah, and we're good with time.
Okay, all right. It was originally open as a Soundies or a silent movie theater in 1921, and then later became a Soundies movie theater and was redone in 1997 to become a live performance venue. And as you see, we are outside of the front of the museums at 18th and Vine, which feature the American Jazz Museum and the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Just to know, any baseball fans out there know that our very own Buck O'Neil was recently inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame.
And someone in the chat was saying that they like the cool piano marquee. It's nice to see that a lot of the older marquees and things have been preserved. They look great.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, as a museum, it's definitely a large part of our mission is to preserve the cultural elements, whether they be the artifacts, the stories of this time and this era, and even what we're in present day, because jazz is a living art form and it's always growing and thriving. And that's our next phase here at the museum. is to continue to honor the past and bring in the future. Here on the corner of 18th and Highland is the Kansas City Juke House, where we have a lot of soul, R&B, and blues music that is performed at this venue. Down that way is the original Parade Park, where a lot of the musicians and baseball players would fraternize when they were kids and play baseball. Everybody played baseball. We all know that baseball is very American. It was no different in this city within a city.
And you know, James, not sure if this was covered, but Gerald was asking, what is the origin of the name Bird?
Yeah, you know, I would have Eric answer that normally, but I'll go ahead and answer it. And Bird comes from another car incident, as they report. They were driving in a rural area, and there were chickens running through the yard or the street. One was hit, and Charlie Parker said, "Hey, man, stop the car. There's a good bird on the street." So, as Eric was mentioning, that traveling in between cities and states and performance venues, you have to imagine that, you know, they were really struggling. I mean, they weren't hitting chickens and roast them on the side of the road, but you know, you don't let anything that's good go to waste. So that's one of the stories. And the other story is Jay McShann is credited with giving him that nickname because when they would be out and performing and staying at the different homes that they were guests at, Charlie Parker could put down some Yardbird chicken. So
It's funny how those names stick. And you know, as we were taking that walk through the museum, I could see the, you know, kind of feel the 40s, the 50s and 60s as we were going through that. It was nice.
Yeah.
And just to think that people used to go out all decked out with their hats and their best Sunday shoes. People don't do that today.
Oh, no. Well, you know, and we've started to kind of really work on bringing some of that back because that's a missing part of the culture. Everything has been very informal. And I think people live so much time in their lives of having to present and put on and look perfect that I think we kind of suffered some blowback from that. But now there's a resurgence of men and women coming out, dressing in their best. We actually do an event here every first Saturday at the American Jazz Museum called the Steppers Lounge. And it's actually two-step, Kansas City two-step dancing. And when you come do that, you have to be dressed to impress. Or else, I don't care how good of a dance you are, it's not gonna matter. Just to mention right here, we have the Rochester Hotel, which is now an apartment complex. This was one of the main hotels that musicians would stay at when in Kansas City. There were two. There was the Streets Hotel, the Rochester Hotel, and then, of course, young men could stay at the YMCA on 18th and Paseo.
And tell us about the church we passed.
Yes, that's one of 4 churches in the 18th and Vine district. It's not Barker Temple. It's a new name to it now. And I believe it was Priest Temple at one time. But there were 4 churches within this 1 block radius. So what would happen is the musicians would go play their gigs. Then they would come to the Mutual Musicians Foundation for a late night jam session. And then 7 o'clock, they'd be at church playing for the choir.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And right here, we are now
asking for forgiveness for what they did the night before.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially for stealing the spiritual and gospel tunes and turn them into blues and jazz songs. So we are now in front of the Mutual Musicians Foundation. And just a little bit of history on the foundation. It was originally the Local 627 Colored Musicians Union. And this is where a lot of the musicians were able to join and have their business and different band leader issues managed. So it functioned like a regular union, but again, as you see, the name said the African American or the Colored Musicians Union. So there was a white union, which was Local 34, and the Black union was 627. And it was really just a way to show how, even with music and art and creativity, how we as a country have really come quite a ways, because we are still in a place where we're trying to reconcile our racial issues. And it was definitely prevalent at that time. But the saying goes that the business was handled at Local 34, but all of the music and creativity was at 627. So in the 70s, when the two unions merged, they attempted to appropriate the building that Local 627 was in.
That figures.
Yeah. And the musicians at that time really weren't going for it. So they said, you know what? We don't mind merging, but we're going to keep our building. Since we're keeping our building, we're going to manage it separately from the union. And that's when they formed the Mutual Musicians Foundation.
Which is still there today.
Which is still there today.
Awesome.
Open on Friday and Saturday, and 1:30 a.m. to 5 a.m. So if anybody wants to get out, I'm usually standing at the door, and I'm going to come off of that screen right now and go back to our Zoom here.
And when you get a second, can you explain how the word juke joint came into play, where that came from?
Absolutely. Can you all hear me now?
We can hear you, but we'd like to see your smiling face.
Oh, we're in transition. You can't see all the magic
excuse
behind
me.
the-
Okay, I see what we're doing. I see.
Yeah, no. I'm coming on. I'm actually coming on. We're the name Juke Joint is what you asked about,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
The Juke Joint name is what you asked about. So really, that's really something that came out of Southern culture and history. And those were small clubs, usually in the woods, where the musicians and the local town folk of the Black community would gather to perform. Because as we all know, a lot of the things that Black Americans had to work with at that time were less than first class or A1 accommodation, especially in the South. Now, the word juke, I've had so many stories from this. So I'm gonna go with my grandma's story, who's from Starkville, Mississippi. So she said it was called the juke joint because the catchphrase or the slang word was to get juked. So basically to have a good time, to get drunk, to let your worries go. So when you go down to the juke joint, it's basically kind of a slang for letting your hair down and unwinding. But like many things in American, in our American language and word system, you can attach a lot of different meanings depending on who's talking about it. So, yeah. We're about to go live with the band here in about a minute. You can probably see them on screen now. And I'm actually entering the Mutual Musicians Foundation. So I have time for a couple more questions before we get into the music with the band.
Well, someone wanted to know about J.D. Valentine's name, his last name. Does it have anything to do with the street in the Westport area, the street named Valentine?
Oh, Mr. Valentine is actually from St. Louis.
Okay.
So now, with that being said, I don't know, because a lot of us have this lineage of names, and somewhere they're all connected. And that's a very particular name, so
Yes, it
possibly
is.
could be. I got time for one more question. And I'm gonna clue you guys in on something. I'm gonna go ahead and change my settings here for everybody so we can get a look at the inside of the Mutual Musicians Foundation.
Okay, that sounds great.
All right, there we are. So I am on the first floor of the historic Mutual Musicians Foundation, here located at 1823 Highland. And as you see here, I'm gonna switch my camera around. You see our original local 627 American Federation of Musicians banner.
That just reeks.
This organization, yeah, go ahead.
That just reeks of history right there.
Oh yeah,
You know, that's
definitely.
amazing.
And a lot of our pictures and images like this can be found at the Labuddy special collections at UMKC. That's where our photo images from the Mutual Musicians Foundation and Local 627 are archived digitally. So you're free to go on there and view the pictures. Now you can't download the high image qualities because we got ownership rights to these pictures, but you can view them. If anybody's ever interested in using them for educational purposes, they are available with permission. So our mule here really gives a timeline. Yeah, our mule gives a timeline of just jazz and the different musicians that had influence here in Kansas City. We go from about 1920 to 1960 in the present, which we should update here. And you all are actually going to get to experience the band in a different way than most groups, because we actually have a Charlie Parker Spotlight tour going on right now. So we actually have an audience in the musicians room on the second floor. If you come here on a late night, 1:30 to 5 a.m., this is the bar. It's open and it's jumping. That is our weekly fundraiser that we do to make sure that we keep the lights on and everything going here.
Yeah, you know, I was going to ask if there was a bar.
Oh yeah, that's it right there. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah. This is our entryway that kind of highlights our very famous panoramic picture taken on May 4th, 1930, before the Battle of the Bands concert. That was a fundraiser for Local 627. The interesting thing about this picture, it was taken about 24 years before A Great Day in Harlem. I think the photo for A Great Day in Harlem was 1954. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe it was in the 1950s. So this picture was actually taken before that. And you know, the famous picture with all the musicians and jazz musicians in front of the brownstone in Harlem, New York. This was done before that. There is a young Count Basie and his mentor, Benny Moten. And there is that banner.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Wow.
This building was originally a 6-unit apartment complex that the musicians transformed into a musicians hall once they purchased it. All right, we're going upstairs. I'm going to mute. I'm going to let the band take over.
Sounds great, James. And we are having a little bit of issue with the audio. If we could take a look at that. We are good.
That in three has one? Four, you know, yeah, that's three, the American Jazz Museum, as well as your special visit here to the Mutual Musicians Foundation. I'm James McGee. Again, this is Mr. James Hathaway on piano, Mr. P. Cole on drums, and Seco on bass. Hope to see you down here at 18th and Vine sometime soon, and looking forward to another tour.
So James,
Yeah.
can you hear me, James?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Just want to ask you a quick question. We got a couple minutes left. Can you share with everyone about the discounts that people can get to attend the museum, and maybe more information about how they can get to see some of this great music?
Now, you're asking me about the discounts, and Diane was the coordinator for that.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, I believe we offer a $1 off discount for museum admission to AARP members. There's also a discount associated with our membership. I believe there's $5 off the membership, or is a $20 membership. And I'll be happy to get that information back out to Diane. We established that some time ago, but it's $1 off of admission for a museum visit. And I believe it's a $20 membership that's associated with AARP for the American Jazz Museum.
Oh, that's great. You mean our AARP
You had a second question.
cards?
What was that second question?
You mean we get discounts with our AARP cards?
Absolutely, yes.
I absolutely love that.
You had another question. You had another question with that.
Yeah, the second question was just a reminder of how people can see some of this great music.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, you can come down to the Mutual Musicians Foundation on the weekends. Now, I will tell you, we are open late night for our regular fundraiser hours. However, going into the fall and the winter, we're going to be having some what people consider normal hour events and activities. So we're looking at doing a matinee show in the middle of the week that might go from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. On weekdays, maybe a Wednesday or a Thursday. And then we're also rolling out some early evening events for the weekend that would be in the 7 to 9 or 5 to 9 type range for events for people that want to come out a little earlier. And please do, if you have children or you yourself are interested in any of the getting involved in learning music, the Mutual Musicians Foundation is developing a program for some of our younger people here in Kansas City. And we also do private lessons. And then our bigger organization, the American Jazz Museum, it's a separate organization, but the other organization, the American Jazz Museum, has their Jazz Academy. So if you have some junior high kids to high school and you want them to learn jazz, we have a spring, summer, and winter semester. They can feel free to go to the AmericanJazzMuseum.org, where you can get all information about the American Jazz Museum and our Jazz Academy and get them signed up to come learn those classes. They get taught by world-class musicians and have a great experience with a recital at the end of every semester. So we have a jazz vocal class, piano, woodwind and brass, and percussion, I believe, are the 4 areas that they cover.
That is amazing. Pass it on to the next generation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So listen, last question. This is kind of a random question, but tell me something, this behind the scenes. Did those musicians stay up all night so they could start playing at 10 a.m.?
Yes, they did. That is the easy answer.
I'm telling you.
We closed at 5 and they were back here. So, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. That is crazy. Well, we really want to thank the American Jazz Museum. We want to thank you, and we want to thank Eric for all bringing your special sauce to us today. Also, the Mutual Musicians Foundation for this phenomenal tour. We've been getting a lot of great comments in the chat. We'll share those with you, James, because maybe, who knows, you could use them for testimonials for the museum.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And don't forget, we have posted in the chat the AmericanJazzMuseum.org. And other resources in there so that you can utilize to maybe attend the next event in November. We're so excited about that. So again, everyone, thank you for joining us for this wonderful tour. And we invite you to join AARP Missouri and the American Jazz Museum for the next one. And don't forget, we're going to be featuring Duke Ellington, one of my favorite musicians and composers. And that will be on November the 19th. Registration is open now. So if you go to aarp.org, Kansas City, for more information about the next tour. And don't forget about those discounts that James shares. So James, thank you again. And also we'd like to thank our camera person who did such an amazing job today. And let's see, who is that? Let's see, that is
JD Valentine.
JD Ballantyne. Thank you, Mr. JD. Appreciate it. So everybody, that concludes our session today. We cannot wait to come back in November. Any last minute thoughts you'd like to share, James?
No, just come see us at the American Jazz Museum. Our hours are Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sunday, 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Those are our hours right now. We're also available for small group reservations. So if you have 25 or more people, you can come on in and bring your family reunion. We'd love to have you. And anyone who's in Kansas City, we have the In the Yard concert today behind the Jazz Museum at 5 p.m. Saxophone salute at 4 at the Charlie Parker statue, and jazz concert behind the Jazz Museum at 5 p.m. It's going to be phenomenal.
Yes, I know, James. And thank you for being with us today, because we know you've been running like a little hamster in that hamster wheel, coordinating all those other events and being with us today. So AARP thanks, Missouri thanks you, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.